Hey, as you're here, I want to tell you a little bit about our guest. One of the things that makes the Society of Consulting Psychology a unique division in APA is that we actually have members with deep expertise in financial psychology, understanding the psychology of how people react to finances, particularly working with people who are high net worth and ultra high net worth, which are kind of unique populations. And we have a cohort people who have thought about this work, studied this work, do coaching, do teamwork, work with organizations, and actually give this quite a lot of thought. One of them is our colleague Moira Somers, who not only led our special interest group in financial psychology, but she's an author of a really wonderful book with this great title, Advice That Sticks: How to Give Financial Advice That People Will Follow. That's actually a great label for any kind of consulting you might do for that. And what I will tell you all here now, I just told Myra, I don't think she knows this, a couple of years ago, APA invited me to design a workshop on the psychology of partnerships. And when I was looking for research on partnerships and good, sound psychological practice, one of the sources was Myra's book on just the way in which smart financial psychologists and smart financial advisors engage with people so they actually feel the sense of partnership that we'd like to do in much of our work. So I know firsthand what Myra can offer us for that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Myra. She's going to join us and talk about this topic of financial concerns of high earning and ultra high net worth executives and branch out to the topic as she chooses to. And then around midway through the hour, we'll probably shift. We'll go into some breakout groups, give you a chance to talk about that, see how this reflects your own work, and then come back together as a large group and close on the hour for that. But with that, Myra, let me, and just so you know, Myra is a family wealth consultant. She's the chief learning officer for Blackwood Family Enterprise Services. In addition to her book, she's done a lot of other consulting in Canada and elsewhere, a lot of other things that she can talk about in her work. And so I'd encourage you also to post questions in the chat for her as well. And with that, Myra, the Zoom floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here, and thank you everybody for coming. I shall just start by saying that, I spent many years working as a neuropsychologist, and one of the things that always frustrated me were these surveys that came out year after year from APA saying that, the biggest source of stress in people's lives was money. But they never really taught us in grad school what it is we should do about that. I think I know more about treating a foot fetish than I did about how to treat people's financial stress. And it struck me that that wasn't exactly the best use of time. And so over time, I began to try and dig more and more into clinical aspects of working with money, and then into consulting aspects of working with money. And while it is true that I do work with some of the wealthiest families on the planet, I also like to use the earnings from that work to really think about what is it that could level the playing field in some ways. What is it that can raise other people's access to financial resources, everything from financial competency to actual access to financial instruments, such as loan money for entrepreneurs. So I hope that we can talk about some of the wide-ranging ways that financial psychology manifests in the consulting world, or the opportunities that it can give you if you're at all interested in this domain. So one of the first things that you learn as you move into this area is that there are two sides to money. And from my work at the Financial Transitionist Institute, we often talk about, the technical and the personal sides. And so if you're an accountant or a financial advisor, you know a whole lot about the technical sides. But your training may have been very much lacking on the personal side of money, which is what we hope that it will do for us in our life. And while both sides of money are equally important and complex and need us to be skilled, it's actually the personal side that drives decision making. And so, if advisors or accountants or whoever it is, if they don't know how to translate their recommendations to people, first of all, so that they're understandable, and secondly, so that they're meaningful, it may very well be that really excellent advice goes unheeded. One of the reasons why it can be so challenging um, to meet people where they are with money is that it's so deeply embedded in our psyches. There isn't a thread that you can pull in the tapestry of human life that doesn't pass through money in some way, shape, or form. It is the longest lasting relationship of our life. It began influencing us long before we were born in the migration patterns of our ancestors, for example. Even if our ancestors were here in North America, where people moved to find resources and the best places to be. It affected the quality of the nutrition that was available to us in utero. It affected where we grew up, whether and where we went to school. It also very much influenced our choice of marriage partners and will, in fact, influence the likelihood of our staying married or repartnering after a divorce. And what you learn very quickly as a therapist is that if you innocently ask people about money, you can suddenly feel like you accidentally stuck a fork in a toaster. Like it just gets kind of volatile fast. It does carry a charge. And so if you're going to work in this area, one of the things that you have to appreciate is that people with wealth are no different from middle class people or um, people who are struggling to sort of get on the step in terms of the level of charge that can exist around money. That those with wealth and those who work with the wealthy at the banks or in advising capacities of various sorts, those people often have very complicated relationships with money, and they may need help to kind of take the charge, to bring that electrical charge to ground. Um, because, they too have relationships and hopes and dreams and emotions, lots and lots of emotions. In fact, what we might say is that above all else, money equals feelings. Money is not a values neutral domain. This is, sometimes I feel when I hear people talking about money, like kind of feels like you're hearing people talk about guns. Guns don't kill people, people kill people. It's like money doesn't have any intrinsic value. It's values neutral. It's like, no, it's not. It's actually values rich. It's incredibly rich. And one of the things that we need to do as coaches and consultants is to begin to surface some of that stuff so that people, including us, but our clients, have a sense of what is it that lies beneath? What is it that might be driving the bus in ways that even they aren't so sure about? Another thing that money sometimes is a magnifier. When you've got more of it, it just kind of brings out more of what there already is. If you have a propensity to addiction, it means you can have a whole lot more of stuff to be addicted to. If you have control issues, it means that you can really exert control much more significantly to many more people if you happen to be the captain of industry, the head of an enterprising family. Whatever it is that's within you, if you add money to it, that thing, that personality trait, that generosity, for example, can be magnified as a result. And sometimes we think that, if you have kind of made it financially, if you're into that, category of wealth, or you've created a successful business, that you must have the thing all figured out. But like everybody else, we're just trying to figure it out as we go. You think about family. You may all come from a family, but when you get your own, you're figuring it out as you go. And although all of us grow up with this incredible multi-dimensional experience of money, we're also just figuring it out as we go, as we grow our own businesses. And the figure is that 80% of America's millionaires are first generation wealth builders. And there was a study of the Forbes 400 list of the people who showed up on that over a 40-year period. And over that time, the number who were of those billionaires born into affluence actually shrunk considerably. It actually halved, while those who were born into poverty remained constant. So about a fifth of people who become billionaires actually started out with some very, very hard knocks against them. And so it's not like everybody who has attained great wealth came to that wealth with the knowledge of how then to invest it. They may have learned how to earn it, but they may have had no idea about how to invest it, about how to vet advisors, about how to have tender and productive conversations with partners about it, about how to transmit values, about how to predator-proof families, all of these things that you think that you might, be very well served in knowing how to do at various points across the wealth spectrum. It's not that the majority of people who attain wealth in that first generation are necessarily any further ahead than the rest of us. Jim Grubman, who's a member of our division, has written a wonderful book, and he's been an incredible thought leader in this space. And he and Dennis Jaffe talk about the journey from either poverty or middle-class life into wealth as being quite akin to immigration. So you have people who are immigrants to that land, the people who weren't born there, but are now living in it by virtue of the enterprises they created, or perhaps, oh, I have tea delivery, excuse me. Thank you very much. For some people, like the pro athletes I worked with, that is a very sudden immigration. They're 18 or 19 years old and suddenly have a significant amount of wealth to manage, or perhaps they've won a lottery. I'm working with a family right now that won $1 billion. It's over $1 billion. Like, what in life prepares you for that? Huh? So they are very much immigrants to the land of wealth. And then generation 2 are those who were raised in the new country by these folks who have ties to the old world, but also who've made the decision to be in this new place, and who may, so those children end up sort of bicultural. They may have had all kinds of observations about what it was like to grow that business, what it was like to have had wealth and then, to have not had wealth and then to have had wealth, and to have seen what their parents went through. And then generation 3 are those who, they were born into the land of wealth. They don't know what it was to be without it. They may not even have really strong connections to how it came about that they are now in this era. And so when you think about what that's like in terms of, if your parents came here from Czechoslovakia or China, by the 3rd generation, you may have lost touch with the language. You don't know the story of quite what your grandparents went through. And all of those dynamics can be at play in this acculturation to financial change as well. One of the things that first generation wealth builders are constantly told, and have a deep fear of at many levels. It's kind of in advance of Halloween. It's like these scary statements that come out at them. The money will wreck the kids. The kids will wreck the money. That it will be this vicious cycle, that there's a super high chance that the kids will grow up spoiled and disincentivized, and that they in turn will be really irresponsible and are at high risk of losing the family fortune. And for many, many decades, there has been that message that's come forward, often by financial professionals, emphasizing this message. And there have been some influential studies. You've probably all heard of certain proverbs like shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations, touted as though that's like an inevitability or even a majority thing, as opposed to a proverb, which is kind of a caution that this could happen, but it's not necessarily, the statistical probability. And some of the things that have been touted as statistical probability, like 70% of wealth transfers will fail, turn out to have been based on disproven data and really inadequate research design that were, in fact, never replicated again. But they get repeated over and over again. And we can probably think of lots of studies from different domains. I remember, a study on goal setting that was supposed to have come out of Harvard, that, the people who set goals from Harvard were that much more successful than the people who didn't set goals. And turns out that study actually didn't even take place. So we have to be super careful when we're passing on these things that are supposed to be, gospel, and take a look at, follow it back to the original study, and see what it is, has it been replicated? What are the new stats on it? So when I put out the stuff around 80% of millionaires in America are first generation wealth builders, just trying to find the data, and does that appear to be true, and to what degree, and how many kind of did come into this world in at least, affluent families. It's important that we try to understand the source of the data, and make sure that it's got some validity to it. And if we don't know, to say, we think this is still true, but we're not sure. In fact, but what we do know is that 70% figure is not solid data. Another one that has been passed down in family business lore is that only 13% of family businesses survive to the 3rd generation. And again, super limited research design, again, not replicated and superseded by better research that shows, a given business that a family started may not have gone to the 3rd generation, but maybe it's because, spats went out of style. So the spat factory didn't make it to the 4th generation, but the family actually started other businesses. And so how you track where things go really matters. And it matters because what it does is it feeds into that emotionality of families and parents and grandparents and businesses, and really influences how well they plan and how well they discuss and how thoughtful they are in parenting and in giving. The 3rd generation often has just an incredibly different journey in life. And I sometimes think about it as, when they talk to me, I'm often reminded of a Rorschach test. And what they describe is that by virtue of their last name, people just project stuff onto them. Oh, you're a fill in the last name, a Bezos, a a Gates. You must be ... And it doesn't matter who they actually are. Certain things get assumed about them, like they've never known hardship, that they never had to work, that their future is all mapped out for them. Those kinds of things are often assumed. It's often assumed that because they were born into wealth, that they really understand how the financial world works. It's often understood that they have great confidence. When, you know, all of these things may be huge sources of struggles for them, that they often have really challenging journeys in terms of their own senses of legitimacy. So it's important to understand who it is that you're working with, and that you watch your own assumptions in working with them. I was a professor at a medical school for nearly 3 decades, and the area of research that I was most interested in was why it is that expert advice goes to waste, why it is that it goes unheeded. The research typically shows that about 20%, of people who show up at a professional's door asking for help with a certain medical problem, for example, or behavioral health issue, only about 20% seem to be ready to take action within the immediate next few weeks. And so what we were interested in as teachers at the medical school was, what's the point of teaching these students how to design the perfect treatment plan for any given disease if the patients themselves won't follow through on that advice? Now, the problem of patients not following through with advice, that good advice gone to waste problem, used to be called patient non-compliance, but that term went out of favor and subsequently was dubbed non-adherence. It was felt to be more respectful of autonomy, a little bit less power-driven. And I really like it. It reminds me of advice that's been written on poor quality sticky notes that doesn't have adhering power. And so it's our job as professionals to figure out, how do we make it stick? And so that also became something that interested me with respect to the financial domain, because financial advice can be especially challenging to follow, it turns out, for a variety of reasons. Just switch out a few terms, and you'll see we've got exactly the same problems within the financial domain as we did in medical domains or healthcare domains. And we find out that there's limited independent advice on this because of how financial firms operate. They typically don't want to publish their failures, whereas healthcare systems have to keep publishing data as a condition of getting funding. But it keeps coming out, that a great amount of advice just doesn't get implemented, or it only gets implemented in part. And when we look at, over the course of a year, this is for business owners, how much of that advice, it's about a quarter of it, and then 3/4 just kind of sits there. And so we end up having a whole bunch of stuff that just kind of goes to waste because it's not landing on receptive ears, or people just don't know what to do with it. What we know from the research is that there are 5 domains that affect follow through in virtually any sphere of life that you might be working in. Here I've used the acronym FACTS to describe what those domains are within the financial domain, with F standing for finance. But if you're giving advice for fitness, the F would stand for fitness. If you're giving advice in terms of, dog obedience, you could switch out the F. There's always something that's domain specific about the area that you're working in that will have some specific challenges. And we've already talked about what those are with finance, that it's emotional, that it changes, that it's so values laden, and that many of the people giving the technical advice aren't equipped to deal with the personal side. But then all of these, the other 4 domains are actually universal. No matter what domain you might be giving advice in, there are challenges that have to do with characteristics of the advice itself, things that reside in the client, things that reside in the advisor and the advisory team. So within healthcare, that would be physician, for example, and the healthcare team, or the psychologist and the team surrounding the psychologist, nursing. And then there are factors that have to do with environmental factors, including the defaults that exist to either support or thwart follow through. There are some characteristics of advice in any domain that just make it hard to follow, that put rocks in the road of progress. These are the characteristics of advice that's hardest to follow, no matter what domain you're in. And much financial advice. Think of the last time you went to see your financial advisor for a tune-up. If any of you have ever been told that, you got to get an estate plan put together. Well, that is not a one-step task, let me tell you. That is a multi-step task. You've got to, find the lawyer. You've got to figure out who's going to be the guardian for your children if you have them. You've got to reach out to people. You've got to agree with your spouse that that's what's going to happen. You've got to get things like a healthcare directive in place. The estate attorney is going to be giving you many, many steps. And once given, will essentially just say, rattle my cage when you're ready and we'll get this done. But there's no monitoring. There's no reminding. And because it's so unfamiliar to most of us, this is a reason why 60% of Americans don't have a will. And 80% of Americans don't have a healthcare directive in place. It's unpleasant to think about your own death and to make plans for it. And so people, frankly, just don't. What's another one of the domains of the facts paradigm that we need to think about? I mentioned that one of the things that really has my heart is what makes it hard for people to access things like the programs meant to alleviate poverty, or the programs meant to give access to underserviced people so that they can start their own businesses. And it turns out that one of the huge problems is sludge, unhelpful frictions that are built into many financial applications that just stop people in their tracks. And sludge, it turns out, like, just think about the last time you may have tried to unsubscribe. I had a patient or a client recently try to unsubscribe to Tinder. Oh my Godfrey. It was unbelievably hard to do. And friction we usually think of as sort of unintentional mistakes. There's a kind of friction that's called dark patterns, where it's actually intentional. It's fully designed to be hard. I think this one was dark patterns. But anyway, much of sludge is just unintentional, but boy, is it powerful. It disproportionately affects the people who can least afford it: the poor, the elderly, the outsiders, and the busy. People like you and me. And any one of these domains can interact with any of the others to make it harder or easier to follow through. And this is my last point, and then we'll get a chance to hear from each other, is that when you are working as a coach, as a consultant, as a clinician, it's a really good idea if you can start thinking about yourself as an implementation partner. That it's essentially, it's wonderful if you're clever, just like it's wonderful if that accountant or financial advisor that I threw up on the first slide is technically proficient. But what you also need to do is get over to that personal side to think about, how is this person going to implement my really excellent counsel? How are we going to make that fit into his or her life? We might think that the C in that facts paradigm, the client has all the power. They're the ones that decide whether to follow through or not. But what we know is that clients who don't follow through don't feel like they've got all the power. They actually feel really bad often about it. They feel ashamed, in fact, when they're not getting stuff done. And that's when they start bailing on follow-ups. And this includes captains of industry that we might be coaching. They obviously experience more negative consequences when they're not doing the very things that they came asking for help with. And then they become less satisfied with us. And whoops, they are, sorry, I'm so sorry. Then they are likely to do one of two things as a result of that dissatisfaction. They're either likely to fire us, or which something that can sometimes feel worse, they don't fire us, but they continue to not follow through, and then everybody's really frustrated. So if we think about taking on this challenge of being a partner, not only in the coaching endeavor and the consultation endeavor, but in the implementation of advice, we can actually take on a huge part. We can deliver this extra. What the literature said, it says, are the hoped for benefits of expert advice. So think about the last people that you might have reached out to for help. When you took your car to a mechanic, when you work out with your personal trainer, it's not because you can't count to 8 on your own, is it? Right? That's not why you hire a personal trainer. And it's not because you don't go to the grocery store to buy chicken wings because theoretically you're not capable of slaughtering a chicken, right? It's because you want other people to have done these things for you and alongside you in service delivery. So these are the things that the research says people want more of and less of when they reach out to us. And you'll notice how many of these are actually emotional, right? People come away from their encounters with experts, so they hope, not just knowing something different, but feeling something different so that they can go on to be doing something different. And that's all I got for you right now. And I hope that's enough, Mark, for us to have the start of some good conversation.
Yeah, I am continually, every time I hear you talk, I'm taken back by your command of individual psychology, group family psychology, multi-generational psychology, alongside the financial and business side of it.